I want you to close your eyes for a second. Picture the most desolate, wild place you can imagine.
Okay.
Maybe it's the Scottish Highlands or a windswept heath in, 18th century England.
Right, just scrub, dirt, and wind. Nothing but nature.
Exactly. It's raw. It's untamed. Now, you're walking along this heath, head down against the wind, and your boot hits something hard.
Mm-hmm.
You look down. It's a stone.
Mm-hmm.
Jagged, rough, maybe covered in a bit of moss.
Just a stone.
So, do you stop and ask, why is this stone here? Who built this stone? What is its purpose?
Probably not. It's a stone. It's part of the background noise of the universe. It lacks intentionality.
Intentionality. Good word.
It's just a product of raw geological forces. Wind, rain, erosion. It doesn't scream design.
Right. It's just part of the furniture of the earth.
Sure.
But, and here is the pivot that changed Western thought.
Yeah.
You keep walking,
Okay.
and 10 feet later, you see something glinting in the heather.
Yeah.
You pick it up. It's not a stone. It's a pocket watch.
Yeah.
You see the gold casing, the glass face.
Yeah.
You pop the back open.
And suddenly, you aren't looking at geology anymore. You're looking at engineering.
Yes. Yeah. You see gears, springs, levers, a balance wheel oscillating back and forth.
You see a mechanism where every single part is grinding against another part to do one specific thing.
Tell time.
To tell time.
Now, the question is, could you look at that watch and say, oh, the wind and the rain just sort of pushed these brass molecules together over 1 billion years until they started ticking?
No rational person would say that. That would be absurd. You immediately look for the guy who dropped it.
You look for the watchmaker.
The complexity forces you to infer a designer.
And that right there, that shift from it's just a rock to there must be a maker, is perhaps one of the most famous arguments in the history of philosophy, theology, and science.
It is the watchmaker analogy.
And today, we are going on a deep dive, not just into that argument, but into the mind of the man who made it so famous.
William Paley.
William Paley. Now, I have to be honest. Before we started researching this, if I knew the name at all, I knew him as a caricature. He's often painted as this, dusty, old-fashioned theologian who was naively trying to prove God exists before Charles Darwin came along and ruined the party.
That is the common narrative, yes. He's often treated as the before picture in the history of biology, the guy who got it wrong.
But the reality is so much more fascinating.
It is. If we look past that caricature, what we find in William Paley is a rigorous logician, a utilitarian philosopher, and a surprisingly radical thinker.
Radical how?
Well, this is a man whose work defined Cambridge education for a century. This is a man who influenced everyone from Charles Darwin to Richard Dawkins.
And get this, he was a man who supported the American Revolution.
He did. Public.
Which for a high-ranking churchman in England at the time was. That's a bold move.
A very bold move. And he didn't do it because he loved the idea of republics.
No, he did it because he thought it would end slavery.
Precisely. And that's the part of the story most people miss entirely.
So our mission today is to unpack the logic of the watchmaker's mind. We're going to look at his origins, his radical politics, his forensic approach to scripture, and of course, that famous watch.
Right. We need to understand him not just as a religious figure, but as a towering intellectual of the Enlightenment.
Because he wasn't just a country parson, was he?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
He was a top-tier intellectual.
Mm-hmm.
And to understand the watch, you have to understand the mathematician who described it.
A mathematician. Okay, I like that. So let's start at the beginning. Where does a mind like this come from?
Well, he was born in July 1743 in Peterborough, Northamptonshire. But his intellectual formation really begins at a place with arguably the best name in British history.
Which is?
Biggleswick School.
Biggleswick.
Yeah.
You're kidding me. It sounds like something out of Harry Potter.
It does, but it was a very serious place. And here is the interesting dynamic. His father, who was also named William Paley, was the headmaster there.
Oh, well.
And not just for a few years, he ran that school for half a century, 50 years.
So education was literally the family business. I can't imagine the pressure.
Absolutely. Paley attended the school his father ran. You're the headmaster's son. You can't slack off. You are immersed in academic rigor from the moment you can read.
So from Giggleswick, he heads off to university.
He does. He followed a path that was becoming a bit of a family tradition. He went to Christ's College, Cambridge. His father had gone there, and his great-uncle had gone there as well.
And he didn't just go there to party and scrape by, I take it.
Not even close. The notes here say he graduated in 1763 as Senior Wrangler.
Senior Wrangler. Now, to a modern ear, that sounds like he was in charge of the cattle at a rodeo. But at Cambridge in the 18th century, this was a big deal.
Big deal is a massive understatement. You have to understand the intellectual arena of Cambridge at that time. Being the Senior Wrangler didn't just mean you were good at math.
No.
It meant you had survived arguably the most grueling intellectual test in the British Empire.
Wow. What did the test actually look like? Was it just a written exam?
It was days of examination, often referred to as the Senate House examination. And it wasn't just sitting quietly with a piece of paper.
Okay.
A lot of this was disputation. You had to solve incredibly complex problems, often orally, sometimes in Latin, under intense pressure from the moderators.
So you're on your feet, defending your answers in front of everyone.
Exactly. To come out on top, to be, number one, the Senior Wrangler, meant you were the smartest guy in the room, in a room full of the smartest people in England.
So he's a mental athlete.
He is. And this is crucial for you to grasp. Paley isn't a mystic. He isn't a poet who feels God in the sunset. He is a mathematician.
Right.
When he looks at the Bible or when he looks at a flower, he isn't just seeing beauty in the abstract sense. He is seeing an equation.
He's looking for the proof.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He wants the variables to balance. That mathematical training is the skeleton key to his entire philosophy. He wants theology to be as logical as geometry.
That explains his writing style later on. It's so structured.
Yeah.
Premise A, therefore premise B, therefore conclusion C.
It explains everything. After graduating, he didn't leave. He stayed on at Cambridge. He became a fellow in 1766 and a tutor in 1768.
And what was he teaching?
He was lecturing on the heavy hitters of the Enlightenment, people like Samuel Clarke, Joseph Butler, and John Locke.
The big names.
The biggest. He developed a systematic course on moral philosophy. And this is crucial. Those lectures weren't just ephemeral talks. They formed the basis of his later books.
So he was essentially beta testing his ideas on the brightest students in England for years before he ever put them in print.
That's a perfect way to put it. He was road testing his arguments.
Now, speaking of his time at Cambridge, there was a bit of drama, wasn't there? The notes mentioned something called the Feathers Tavern context. This sounds like a pub brawl, but I'm guessing it was a bit more intellectual than that.
A bit more intellectual, yes. This was the subscription controversy. It gives us a really interesting glimpse into Paley's character, his caution, but also his principles.
Set the stage for us. What was the controversy?
At the time, if you wanted to be a member of the university or to become a clergyman, you had to subscribe to the 39 Articles of Religion,
Which were?
the defining statements of Anglican doctrine. So basically, you had to sign a contract saying, I believe exactly these 39 specific things.
All of them. No exceptions.
Correct. And if you disagreed with number 24 or number 31, too bad. You sign or you leave.
That sounds incredibly rigid.
It was, and there was a growing movement, particularly among more liberal or latitudinarian thinkers, to relax these terms. They wanted to simplify the requirements to allow for more freedom of conscience.
And where did Paley, our brilliant young mathematician, stand on this?
It's nuanced. It's very telling. There was a pamphlet circulating that advocated for this simplification. It was written by Bishop Edmund Law.
Okay.
Paley anonymously defended this pamphlet. So he steps into the ring under a pseudonym to support the idea of reform.
Okay, so he's a reformer. He wants to loosen the rules. He's on the progressive side of this.
Yes. However, when a formal petition was organized to officially demand this relaxation, a petition drafted at a place called the Feathers Tavern Paley refused to sign it.
Wait. He defended the idea, but wouldn't put his name on the actual petition. That seems contradictory. Was he scared?
He was pragmatic. He famously said, and this quote has followed him for centuries, he said he could not afford to keep a conscience.
Oof. That sounds cynical.
It does, but you have to interpret it carefully. He was a man who valued reform, but he was wary of putting his name to something so politically charged that it would destroy his career before it even began.
So he wanted to change the system, but he felt he needed to be in the system to do it.
Exactly. You can't change the church if you've been kicked out of it. It shows a man who was careful about how he engaged with the establishment.
That makes sense. He's navigating a very strict hierarchy.
Yeah.
And speaking of that hierarchy, his career starts to move upward. He leaves Cambridge eventually, right?
He does. In 1776, he moves into the church hierarchy full-time. He takes up various rectories, Musgrave, Appleby, Dalston. Eventually, in 1782, he becomes the Archdeacon of Carlisle.
And he had some powerful friends helping him along the way. You mentioned Bishop Edmund Law.
The Law family, yes. They were his patrons. We mentioned Bishop Edmund Law earlier, the one who wrote the pamphlet. Paley was very close with him and his son, John Law, who later became an Irish bishop.
And they were the ones who pushed him to publish.
They really were. They knew he had this brilliant lecture material from Cambridge, and they kept telling him, you need to publish this. Don't let these ideas die in the classroom.
Get it out into the world.
Precisely. Bishop Edmund Law was apparently a very mild man, but he was adamant that Paley should write a book on political philosophy. Paley was actually reluctant at first.
But he did it. And in 1785, he published The Principles of Moral and Political Philosophy.
And it was a sensation. I mean, we cannot overstate how important this book was.
How big a deal are we talking?
It became a required text at the University of Cambridge almost immediately, the very next year.
Wow. Imagine writing a book, and the next year, your old university says, okay, every single student has to read this to graduate.
And they kept reading it. It remained a set textbook well into the Victorian era. It went through 15 editions just in Paley's lifetime. It was a monster hit.
So what was in it that made it so compelling? Because this is where we get to the radical and the rectory part of our outline. I want to circle back to what you said in the intro. You said he supported the American Revolution.
Yes. This is a fact that usually makes people stop and say, wait, what?
Because Paley was a high-ranking official in the Church of England. The king is the head of the church. So for Paley to support the rebels, that's bordering on treasonous.
It was incredibly risky.
So why did he do it? Was he a closet Democrat? Did he just love the idea of republics?
Not exactly. He wasn't really concerned with forms of government. He was looking at the balance sheet of human misery.
The balance sheet of human misery.
Right. You have to remember, as we said, Paley was a utilitarian.
We hear that word a lot. Usually people associated with Jeremy Bentham or John Stuart Mill. What did it mean for Paley writing before them?
For Paley, it was simple. It was about general happiness. He believed that God's will was for his creation to be happy. Therefore, actions that increased the general happiness of the world were moral, and actions that caused misery were immoral.
Okay. A very clear, logical framework. So how does that connect to America in 1776?
Paley looked at the British Empire, and he saw one thing that generated an immense amount of misery.
Slave trade.
The slave trade. He believed that as long as America was attached to Britain, the British Empire would have a financial and political incentive to keep pumping enslaved people into the colonies to fuel the sugar and cotton economies.
So he thought breaking the link might break the chain.
Exactly. He hoped that if America was independent, the British Empire would lose its primary market and therefore its primary reason to support the slave trade.
That's a fascinating bit of political calculation.
It is. He wrote, and I want to quote this because it's so powerful, "The Great Revolution, which has taken place in the Western world, may probably conduce, and who knows, but that it was designed, to accelerate the fall of this abominable tyranny."
Abominable tyranny. That is not subtle language for an archdeacon.
It's incredibly radical. And remember, he's teaching this to the future leaders of the empire.
Right. These Cambridge students are the next generation of prime ministers and members of parliament.
And he's planting the seed in their minds that slavery is a moral rot at the heart of the nation. It's a utilitarian argument against a massive economic institution.
It's interesting. We usually think of utilitarianism as cold calculation. You know, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Right.
But here, he's using it to justify a massive human rights stance.
That's the power of his logic. He argues, slavery causes immense misery. God's will is for happiness. Therefore, slavery is against the will of God. It's a clean, logical proof.
A mathematical proof for abolition.
You could say that. And since this book was a bestseller, that argument seeped into the consciousness of the entire British ruling class. You could argue that Paley did more to end the slave trade by writing that textbook than any protest could, because he changed the minds of the men who would eventually vote to ban it.
So when we think of Paley, we shouldn't just think watchmaker. We should think abolitionist.
We absolutely should. He was a political heavyweight.
So we have the mathematician and we have the political philosopher. But now he turns his attention to the Bible itself. He moves from ethics to, well, the outline says it sounds like crime scene investigation.
He really does. It's a remarkable shift in gears. In 1790, he publishes Horae Pauline, or The Truth of the Scripture History of St. Paul.
Horae Pauline. This is the book you said some scholars think was his most original.
Many scholars do. It's a tour de force of inductive logic. The premise is entirely forensic. He takes two sets of documents from the New Testament. On one hand, you have the epistles of St. Paul, the letters Paul wrote to the churches. On the other hand, you have the book of Acts, which is the narrative history of the early church written by Luke.
And he's comparing them looking for contradictions.
Not just contradictions. He's looking for something much more subtle. He's looking for what he calls undesigned coincidences.
Undesigned coincidences. Break that down for us, because that sounds like a paradox. How can a coincidence be designed?
Well, that's the point. It can't be. Think about it this way. If I want to forge a story with you, if we want to create a fake alibi for a crime, we make sure our stories match perfectly.
Right. We were at the movies at 8 p.m. We saw the action film. We rehearse it.
Exactly. The stories line up too perfectly. But if we are both telling the truth about a real event that we witnessed, we might mention different details that just happen to fit together in a way we didn't plan.
Okay, I think I get it.
Paley combs through the Greek text looking for these tiny moments.
Give me a concrete example. What's one of these coincidences?
Okay. In one of his letters, the Epistle to the Romans, Paul casually mentions that a man named Gaius is his host. Gaius, whose hospitality I and the whole church here enjoy. Just a throwaway line.
Right. Mundane.
But then you go to a completely different document, the First Epistle to the Corinthians. In that letter, Paul mentions that he personally baptized a man named Gaius in Corinth. Paley points out that the book of Acts confirms Paul wrote Romans from Corinth. So the Gaius Paul baptized in Corinth is now hosting him years later. But neither document explicitly makes that connection.
So it's like two puzzle pieces that fit, but neither author seemed to know they were making a puzzle piece for the other one.
Precisely. Paley says, if this was a forgery, the forger would have made a big deal about it to prove the connection. Remember Gaius, the guy I baptized? Well, he's my host now. The fact that it's so subtle, so undesigned, proves to Paley that they are both reflecting a shared, authentic, historical reality.
He's cross-examining the witnesses centuries after the fact.
He is. And he finds dozens of these. He stacks them up one after another until, in his view, the weight of the evidence is overwhelming.
And this book, this method, this set the stage for his next big hit in 1794.
A view of the evidences of Christianity.
This was his direct response to the skepticism of the Enlightenment, right? People like Hume were starting to doubt the miracles, doubt the history. Paley wanted to provide a rational, evidence-based defense.
And judging by his career trajectory, the establishment loved it.
Oh, they showered him with rewards. The Bishop of London gave him a stall in St. Paul's Cathedral. The Bishop of Lincoln made him a subdean. The Bishop of Durham gave him the very wealthy rectory of Bishop Wearmouth. It's a lot of titles.
Yeah.
And presumably a nice bump in salary for his troubles.
He was the establishment saying, thank you for defending us from the skeptics.
And just like his first book, evidences stuck around for a long time.
A very long time. It remained on the Cambridge syllabus until the 1920s. Think about that longevity. From the French Revolution almost to the Jazz Age, students at Cambridge had to grapple with Paley's arguments.
I read somewhere that it wasn't just theology students, it was used for law students too.
Yes, that's a fascinating detail. A.V. Dicey, a famous constitutional theorist in the late Victorian period, later had his pupils read evidences specifically to teach them legal reasoning.
Why?
Because Paley organizes his evidence like a barrister making a closing argument to a jury. It's all about weighing testimony, probability, and the credibility of witnesses. It's a masterclass in building a cumulative case.
So we have the mathematician, the abolitionist, the detective. But now we have to get to the masterpiece, the book that gave us the watch, Natural Theology.
Published in 1802. And the context here is really poignant. We have to humanize Paley for a moment. He wasn't sitting in a comfortable armchair surrounded by books when he wrote this.
What was happening?
He was near the end of his life. He was suffering from an increasingly debilitating illness. The records suggest it was likely something involving the kidneys or stomach, extremely painful.
So he's in physical agony while writing a book about how the body is a perfect machine.
That's the profound irony and the bravery. He pushed through the pain to write this book. And interestingly, he intended this book to be the preamble to all his other work.
The preamble. But he wrote it last. That seems backwards.
Right. But logically, in his system, it came first, he argues. Step 1, look at nature to understand that there is a creator. That's natural theology.
Okay.
Step 2, look at scripture to understand what that creator specifically revealed and wants. That's evidences. And step 3, apply that knowledge to your life and society. That's the moral philosophy.
He was building a grand unified theory of everything, from a blade of grass to the Houses of Parliament.
He was. It was the capstone of his entire life's work.
Okay, let's unpack the argument itself.
Yeah.
The Watchmaker. We did the intro, but let's go deeper. He says if you find a stone, it proves nothing. If you find a watch, the complexity implies a maker.
Correct. The key word for him is contrivance. Paley looks at the watch and sees that the parts are contrived for a purpose. The gears are cut with teeth to mesh perfectly with other gears. The spring is coiled to release energy at a specific controlled rate. The hands are shaped to point to numbers. If you change the shape of the gears or remove the spring, the whole thing fails. It stops telling time.
So the arrangement is the proof, the purposefulness of the arrangement.
Exactly. The arrangement implies an arranger.
Yeah.
Intentionality. And then he makes the leap.
The leap to nature.
He says, okay, now let's look at the human eye. It has a lens to refract light. It has an iris to control the amount of light. It has a retina to receive the image. It has muscles to focus. It has a tear duct to keep it clean.
It's a biological camera.
It is infinitely more complex than a watch. Therefore, he argues, if a watch requires a watchmaker, the eye requires an eye maker.
I take my stand in human anatomy. That's his quote, right?
It is. He was fascinated by anatomy. He fills the book with page after page of examples. He talks about the valves in the heart, how they're perfect little one-way doors to let blood flow one way but not the other. He talks about the structure of bird bones, how they are hollow to be light for flight, but trussed internally to be strong enough to support the wings.
It sounds like he's doing biology.
Yeah.
He sounds like a modern biologist describing adaptations.
He is doing biology. That's the thing. He isn't quoting scripture here. He's quoting the best science of his day. He argues that there is an intelligent designing mind necessary to organize these forms.
Now, did he come up with this idea out of thin air? Was he the first guy to say, nature looks designed?
Oh, no, not at all. He was remixing and perfecting. The ancient Roman philosopher Cicero used examples like sundials and water clocks to argue for a divine order.
Right.
And Enlightenment thinkers often used machines as analogies. Paley drew heavily on earlier English naturalists like John Ray and William Durham.
So why do we remember Paley and not John Ray? What made Paley's version the one that stuck?
Because Paley was a better writer. He was clearer. He perfected the argument. He wrote it with such clarity, such beautiful prose, and such a wealth of specific biological detail that his version became the definitive one. He made it accessible to everyone.
He also looked up, didn't he? Not just in anatomy, but at the stars.
Yes, astronomy. He compares the solar system to a giant clock. The regularity of the planets orbiting the sun according to precise laws. He actually cited his old friend John Law and the astronomer Royal John Brinkley. He wanted the science to be accurate to the best knowledge of 1802.
And the reception. Did people buy it?
They devoured it. It was an instant bestseller. The Edinburgh Review, a very serious intellectual journal, praised his judicious disposition of forces. They admired how he lined up his arguments like an army to cover every possible angle of attack.
It seems like it hit a nerve at that particular time.
It did. It appealed to Victorian anxieties. The world was changing fast industrialization, the French Revolution. Paley offered a comforting view. The universe is an orderly machine, supervised by a benevolent architect. Everything is under control.
But not everyone loved it. The notes mention something called the Oxford movement.
Right. These were the more high church, ritualistic Anglicans later in the 19th century. They didn't like it at all.
Why not? It's an argument that proves God exists. Shouldn't they like that?
They disliked his utilitarianism. They hated the idea of judging God's will by general happiness.
Too calculating for them.
Exactly. They felt it reduced God to a sort of cosmic engineer, a divine problem solver. They wanted a more mystical, tradition-based faith, not one based on dissecting eyeballs and calculating happiness, but for the broad public and for the scientific establishment of the time, Paley was the man.
So Paley is the dominant voice. But he wasn't the only voice. And this brings us to the intellectual web, because there was a ghost haunting this debate, and his name was David Hume.
David Hume, the great Scottish skeptic. Now, Hume had died in 1776, long before Natural Theology was published. But years earlier, Hume had written dialogues concerning natural religion, where he specifically and brilliantly attacked the design argument.
So he saw this argument coming. What was Hume's beef with it?
Hume pointed out all the flaws in the analogy. He talked about monstrosities.
Monstrosities, what do you mean?
Birth defects, pain, disease, parasites. Hume basically asked, if the world is a perfect machine made by a perfect, all-good God, why is there so much suffering? Why are there hurricanes? Why do children get sick and die?
The problem of evil.
Exactly. He argued that you can't infer a perfect, infinitely good creator from an imperfect, often painful world. The evidence doesn't match the conclusion.
That's a very strong counterargument. Did Paley just ignore it?
No. And this is what makes Paley a serious philosopher, not just a propagandist. He engaged directly with Hume's ideas from his undergraduate days right up to his final works. He didn't just ignore the problem of suffering, he tried to incorporate it into his utilitarian framework.
How on earth do you do that? How do you explain pain in a machine designed for happiness?
Well, he argued that pain often served a purpose like a warning system to tell you to pull your hand from the fire. Or he argued that, on balance, happiness was still the predominant state of nature.
Really?
Oh, yes. He famously wrote, "It is a happy world after all." He looked at swarms of flies buzzing in the sun or millions of young shrimp in the water, and he saw an excess of happiness.
That seems incredibly optimistic, especially from a man who is in constant pain himself.
Extremely optimistic, and that optimism is where he differs most from Hume's skepticism. Hume saw the darkness. Paley insisted on seeing the light.
It's interesting. The source says Hume's works fell stillborn from the press when they were published.
That was Hume's own assessment. In his lifetime, Hume's deep skepticism was too radical for most people. It just didn't sell. Paley, on the other hand, was the voice of the establishment and the people. From 1800 to 1840, Paley was the dominant intellectual force. Hume's arguments were known to scholars, but they didn't really gain popular traction until much later.
But there was one young student at Cambridge who was reading Paley very, very carefully. A young man named Charles Darwin.
This is the most famous and most ironic connection in the whole story. Charles Darwin walked the same halls as Paley at Christ's College. In fact, their portraits face each other there today.
That's incredible. And Darwin was required to read Paley for his degree.
He was required to read the principles of moral and political philosophy for his exams. He had to know it inside and out. But here is the real kicker.
What's that?
Darwin read Natural Theology, the Watchmaker book, on his own. It wasn't required. And he absolutely loved it.
Really? The man who would eventually dismantle the entire design argument loved it.
He was incredibly impressed by the logic. He said in his autobiography that he was initially convinced by it. Darwin admired how Paley built a case piece by piece. He admired the intense focus on the observation of nature.
So, in a way, Paley taught Darwin how to look at nature.
Exactly. Paley taught Darwin to look at an organism and ask, how does this part fit the environment? What is the function? What is the adaptation?
The method was the same.
The method of looking at adaptation in nature started with Paley. Paley's answer was, God designed it that way. Darwin eventually came up with a different answer. Natural selection shaped it that way. But the question, the focus on adaptation, was the same.
That is a profound connection. It's like Paley set the table and Darwin came and ate the dinner, but realized the chef was gravity and time, not a divine hand.
That's a very good way to put it. Paley provided the intellectual hurdle that Darwin had to clear. You can't understand the magnitude of the origin of species unless you understand that it was a direct answer to the world Paley had built.
But even before Darwin published Origin in 1859, Paley was starting to take some hits from other directions, right? The source mentions the medical community.
Yes. By the 1820s and 30s, the political climate in Britain was changing. You had radical reformers like Thomas Wakley, the founder and editor of The Lancet, the famous medical journal.
And what was their problem with Paley? Was it scientific?
It was partly that they saw Paley's anatomical examples as a bit outdated. But more than that, they saw Paley as a symbol of establishment control. Paley's theology was seen as justifying the status quo. God made the world this way, so be happy with your lot in life.
And the radicals wanted to upend all that.
Right. Radicals like Wakley wanted to overturn the old order of medical and scientific education. They attacked Paley as a way of attacking the Anglican Church's grip on power and the universities.
So science and politics were mixing again.
They always do.
Yep.
But despite these attacks from the intellectual left, Paley's core arguments survived in the popular imagination. You had these things called the Bridgewater Treatises.
What were those?
It was a series of 8 books funded by a wealthy earl, written by leading scientists of the day, to explore the power and wisdom of God as manifested in the creation. They were basically high-budget Paley fan fiction.
And there were cheap reprints for the middle class.
Yes. The Society for the Promotion of Christian Knowledge pumped out cheap copies of Paley. So even while the intellectuals at the cutting edge were starting to turn on him, the average middle-class person was still reading him on the train.
So when did the real shift happen? When did Paley go from standard textbook to old-fashioned relic?
World War I.
The war. Why the war?
The sheer existential morass of it. Paley's entire worldview is fundamentally optimistic. It's a moral teleology, the idea that the world is designed for and trends towards happiness.
And then comes the trenches.
Then comes the trenches. Mustard gas, machine guns,
Yeah.
the sheer scale of senseless slaughter. It's very, very hard to look at a field in the Somme and say, God designed this world for general happiness.
The optimism just couldn't survive that.
Exactly. The optimism of the Enlightenment collapsed in on itself. The idea that nature is a benevolent machine stopped making sense to a generation that had seen nature and human nature destroy itself on an industrial scale. Paley's happy world suddenly looked naive.
That brings us to the modern legacy. Today, Paley is, well, the source calls him a lightning rod.
He is. He is at the absolute center of the public debate between creationism, intelligent design, and evolutionary biology. His name is invoked constantly.
But it's not just scorn, is it? There's a strange kind of respect there, even from his biggest opponents.
There is. You have to look at Richard Dawkins. He wrote the book The Blind Watchmaker. The title itself is a direct reference to Paley.
And Dawkins is perhaps the most famous atheist and evolutionary biologist in the world.
And he completely disagrees with Paley's conclusion. He believes natural selection is the watchmaker, and it is blind, it has no foresight, no plan, but he calls himself a neo-Palean.
A neo-Palean, what does that even mean?
He respects Paley's method. He respects that Paley didn't just say, it's a mystery or have faith. Paley said, let's look at the evidence. Let's look at the sheer complexity of life and demand an explanation for it. Dawkins appreciates that strong, logical, evidence-based approach, even if he thinks the answer Paley found was completely wrong.
So the question Paley asked was the right one, even if the answer was wrong.
That's how Dawkins sees it.
And the design argument hasn't really gone away, has it? It feels like the logic of the watch hasn't disappeared. It just moved.
It moved from biology to physics and cosmology.
Right. We don't look at the eye and say, it must be designed in the same way anymore. We have a very powerful theory in evolution to explain that. But when we look at the Big Bang...
That's the fine-tuning argument, or, to be technical, anthropic cosmological fine-tuning.
Break that down for us. What is that?
It's the observation that the fundamental constants of our universe, the strength of gravity, the strong nuclear force, the rate the universe expanded after the Big Bang, are tuned so precisely that if they were off by even a tiny, tiny fraction, life as we know it couldn't exist.
So if gravity was a billionth of a percent stronger, the universe would have collapsed back in on itself immediately.
Right, and if it was a billionth of a percent weaker, stars and galaxies would never have formed. The dial is set exactly where it needs to be for us to be here having this conversation.
So the question Paley asked on that heath in 1802 is still the question today, just on a cosmic scale.
It is.
You're walking across the cosmic heath. You find a universe that is perfectly calibrated for life in the middle of a chaotic void. Do you assume that's just a lucky accident? Or do you assume there was a universe tuner, a universe maker?
Paley wouldn't understand our physics, but he would recognize the structure of that argument immediately. It's his watch, scaled up to the size of the cosmos.
It seems like whether you view him with reverence or revulsion, you can't ignore him.
No. His work remains a notable body in the canon of Western thought. Dicey, the lawyer we mentioned, had his students read Paley not for the theology, but for the thinking, and I think that is a great and fitting legacy.
So let's wrap this up. We've gone from Giggleswick to Cambridge.
Yeah.
We've seen the young math genius, the Senior Wrangler, become the cautious reformer.
Then the radical abolitionist.
The radical abolitionist who wanted to end slavery to increase general happiness. And we've seen the brilliant detective of Scripture and the dying man writing a masterpiece about a watch that would challenge and shape science for 2 centuries.
It is a remarkable intellectual journey. He made complex ideas transparent. He provided the intellectual structure that later thinkers like Darwin had to either build on or, in his case, dismantle.
Here's the final thought I want to leave you with today. Paley looked at the world, at the birds, the mussels, the stars, and he saw general happiness. He saw a machine built for well-being.
A profoundly optimistic view.
In our modern world, we often focus on the chaos. We talk about entropy. We see the randomness, the struggle for survival.
We do. We're more attuned to the Hume side of the argument now.
So the question is it harder for us now to see the happiness Paley described? And does that fine-tuning of the universe today pose the exact same question as the watch on the heath did in 1802? If you found a universe perfectly tuned for life, would you assume it had just always been there? Or would you start looking for a universe maker?
That is the question that keeps the debate alive and well.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the watchmaker's mind.
It's been a pleasure.